The modern attack surface is vast and permeable, extending from the data center to the cloud and device edge. Security teams are stretched thinner and thinner as they try to cover this ground. The result? More high-profile breaches hit the news every day. Don't let your organization be next. ExtraHop delivers security from the inside out, helping enterprise security teams detect threats up to 95% faster and cut staff time to resolve by 2/3 or more. Act with confidence. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. Major data security breaches continue to make headlines. Are you prepared? Standardizing your security framework will help you stay competitive, be a reliable business partner, and manage intellectual property, financials, and employee and customer information. The American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, offers the standards you need in one place through standard subscriptions, a cost-saving, fully customizable solution. Sign up for your free trial at securityweekly.com/ANSI. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian. Secure World Boston is hosting their 15th annual conference next week, March 27th and 28th, at the Heinz Convention Center. Security Weekly listeners save $100 off a full conference pass by visiting secureworldexpo.com and using the discount code SecurityWeekly. Also, we just released our 2019 Security Weekly 25 Index Survey. Please go to securityweekly.com and click the survey link to help us understand who's evaluating, using, or formerly use any of the Security Weekly 25 companies. The results will be summarized and presented back to all responders in a private webcast. Yeah, we'll keep that survey open another week or two, try to get some more results, because I'm curious how people are using some of these public security companies.
Yeah,
all right,
that's going to be fun.
Yeah, it'll be fun, kind of analyze that data. All right, let's dig into our articles for this week. You know me, I try to piece all these together, so we'll see how these go. First article for me is why you need to avoid distractions when you write. This is a big one for me. I think it's more than just writing sometimes for me, but this is one area where I can't have noise or distractions around me. Writing, especially things like blog posts or presentations, right? We've been working on our marketing presentation that we're going to give at InfoSec World. I need to isolate myself and get those distractions away. Other tasks are okay, but I for some reason, I really have to concentrate when I'm building presentations or writing. The great article that talks about some of those distractions and how to eliminate them.
I think it's how it fueled one of my passions for headphones and such, because whenever I write an article or write code, like distractions are really hard, right? And I think it's pretty similar in that when you're writing a presentation, an article, or code, if you get interrupted, even if it's a mental disruption, like you see a pop-up alert come up that someone's texting you, or there's background conversation, and now you're half paying attention to what's going on in the background, and you lose your flow, right? And so it's almost like you're taking a mental break from what you're doing, and then you have to go back to it. And when you do that, your brain has to like reassimilate that information to get back where you were. So it takes like 3 times as long. Not even twice as long, 3 times as long.
Yeah, he talks about the 3, right? People, right? Close the door to my office. Okay, out. Phone's a big one for a lot of people, right? We're so used to, a notification pops up on your phone. You're like, oh, I got to look at it.
Right.
And then just the internet in general. The internet's the easiest one for me, actually, because I don't really do a lot of surfing. I don't have a lot of social media. I'm pretty boring that way. It's my Twitter for work. It's my LinkedIn for work. But, I'm not doing Facebook or anything like that. So that one's actually really easy for me. But it's the phone, and because I work at home, the people. That's the hardest 2 for me.
Agreed. I guess it kind of ties into afraid to take a break.
Yes, it does. See, I try to pull these together, right? Because you just said it, right? You just said it's like taking a break. This article actually talks about the good of forcing yourself to take a break. Now, in the previous article, those distractions sometimes can give you a break, but an unintended break. This article really digs into why taking breaks at periodic times is really good for you to kind of recharge, maybe for creativity and other things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which is needed at times.
Yeah, you got to come back to it. So I think the first article addressed the flow that you have, right? But whatever you're creating, whether it be an article, a presentation, or software, you oftentimes will get to a point where you're kind of stuck, right? You may see in your article, like, I kind of know what I want to describe, but I don't know the best way to describe it, right? Or in my presentation, like, I know I need some slides that talk about this, but like, it's just not there yet. In code, all the time, I'm like, I'm stuck. Like, I don't know how to solve this technical problem, and I've tried 3 or 4 different things. Those are the points where I think it's important that you take a break, step away. It goes back to my good buddy Dave. When I first started working in IT, Dave was the troubleshooting man. He was the manager of our customer support department. And the greatest lesson Dave taught me was walk away. He's like, let's go outside, have a smoke, or get a cup of coffee. We'll talk about it, but step away. And oftentimes you come back and either you've got those creative juices flowing again, or you're like, oh, I got like 3 things to try now that I'm really excited about that I just couldn't pull myself out of the weeds enough to see the forest through the trees until I took a break. Yeah, super important.
Yeah, and I do the same thing with presentations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing the InfoSec World DevSecOps Summit, and I have a kind of a standard presentation, but I draft it.
Yes.
And then I don't touch it for days.
Go
and
back.
then I go back and I review it. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I want to add this. I want to tweak that. I did the same thing with our marketing presentation last week. I drafted it, sent it to you guys to review, didn't look at it for a couple days, knowing I wanted to add some more stuff. But then I went back to it, and then I kind of added those additional pieces.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good way for me to get the initial thoughts on paper, then kind of review it and finalize that. But sometimes that couple day break in the middle, in the case of my InfoSec World presentation, was a couple weeks.
Yep.
It really gives me an opportunity to go back and fine tune it and really get across that message I want to get across.
Yeah, it's why it's important to build in time to do that kind of stuff, right? I mean, some people can write the whole presentation the night before. I can't do that. I at least have to have a draft that I'm working off of, and then sure, the night before I'm putting in my final edits, or the day before the night before the deadline or whatever. Although most of the time I don't really meet the deadline, but that's neither here nor there. At the final hour, I'm revising it, right? And that's important.
Correct. And I always have to do that final prep right before I present it anyways.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And irregardless, there's always like, oh yeah, I want this animation to look different, or I tweak a word or something. The final is never final for me, unfortunately, I think in some cases. Yeah.
Oh, so Boeing's 737. I saw some news articles about this, Matt.
Yeah, just a few. I thought this was a really good article because it talks about how Boeing should have responded to this crisis. And look, most of our listeners are going to remember the Tylenol scare from years ago, right? And Johnson & Johnson at the time said, look, we're going to pull everything off the shelves. We're going to redo all this stuff. They took it very seriously. And it created really the standard of how most people would respond to some sort of life-threatening activity. And this article goes in to say, Boeing really didn't do that with the 737 MAX, right? We had the Ethiopia Air a week or so ago, and then 5 months before that was another crash. And so a lot of people are questioning, is the plane safe? And instead of stepping back, which this article talks about, and saying Boeing should have said, look, we believe in our stuff, but yeah, you're right. Maybe we should temporarily ground these aircraft, take a deep dive, investigate. Let's make sure everything's working okay because we see this is a potential crisis. And then, get the actual research done and then come back out and decide which way to go. They took a stance of, no, we're safe, we're fine, there's nothing wrong here. And
Hmm.
I think it's important for any company where there's a potential concern of life, and in this case there was, to kind of take the high ground a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and say, look, we're going to voluntarily do this because, look, we believe in our stuff, but we get it. There might be a consumer concern, or in the case of different aviation administrations saying, let's make sure the safety of our passengers are first. This article talks about maybe they should have gone that route, and maybe it wouldn't have been so bad because their stock has taken a beating in
Mm-hmm.
the last week over these just continual stories about the concerns of this plane.
Yeah, and it's not always, you don't always have a smoking gun when there's an issue, right? And
Right.
planes aside, in IT especially, it takes time to dig down into, oh, I can now prove that that's the issue, right? And what you don't want to do is start swapping out a bunch of components, whatever, hardware or software, without knowing exactly if that's going to fix the problem or not. Because then you're just swapping stuff out for the sake of swapping stuff out, right? So I think it's really important to understand the problem, how it presents itself, understand what caused the problem, and then test your fix to make sure that it's fixed, and now you're ready to move forward. But doing those things is not straightforward with something as complex as an airplane or some kind of server or whatever, right?
Right. And I think this is just a really good lesson for leaders when there is a major crisis. Step back, decide your actions so that you're looking at it from the customer or the consumer
Mm-hmm.
point of view, and understand that realm in order to make the right decisions about how you move forward. It's just a really good lesson here that I thought would really resonate with some of the leaders that have to make some of these hard calls and decisions when something goes wrong. It's just something that I would ask them to kind of reflect on and say, yeah, maybe Boeing could have handled it better. Maybe I can learn from that. So the next time something happens, maybe I respond differently.
Well, and I think going back to our conversation with Nick from Signal Sciences, it's why having that telemetry is so important. And I think when it's a security incident, sometimes we can't answer some of the questions that are being asked because we don't have the right telemetry or information. We're like, I don't know. And that's the worst answer you could have as an executive that is responding to a security breach, and you got to go in front of your board and they're like, how did they get in or what happened? You're like, I don't know, right? You've got to be able to collect that information accurately and respond to it according to your plans. And for me, it's about being resilient, I think is the best word that I can think of. It's not being completely foolproof or bulletproof, right? But it's about being resilient. Part of that is understanding your failures, why it failed, and having a corrective action plan moving forward.
Yeah. The other piece here, which ties into this next podcast, is it's also building trust with your customers and your consumers,
Yes.
which is important from a brand perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to dig into this. I'm a big believer in open, transparent trust relationships. I always have been. I've said in my career, you're going to love me or you're going to hate me, but you're always going to get it straight from me. That's just the way I am. But taking that and building trust, I think, is important. This podcast that's on HBR, I think, is a really good one to listen to
Mm-hmm.
on reinforcing how do you build that trust internally, externally. It's a component, and it's something that's so important to the security community. We have to build trust with the development teams, like we talked about in the last session with Nick. We have to build trust with the board and others that we're doing the right things to mitigate risk. We have to build trust with our customers that we're securing their data, protecting their privacy. Trust is an important part, I think, of the security ecosystem and all of us in it. And so this is a really good podcast for people to get some tips on how to build that trust. I won't dig into it much more than that. Kind of tied into the last article.
Cool.
All right, let's get into a couple other things here that I thought were interesting. Digital transformation is not about technology. This is a good article, and a lot of us think about the technology aspects of digital transformation. We think about applications and containers and cloud and all this stuff. There's a lot more to digital transformation than technology. I'm going to give you a perfect example. I I only trust online banks. I don't trust any of the mobile banking apps. And my main bank decided they were going to swap out the online banking system, a technology decision. I hate the new app, the online interface. It's horrible. And this article talks about the, why it's not just a technology decision. It's get input from your customers. Think about what's strategic. Think about how that impacts usage and user experience. Those are big drivers for digital transformation, not the technology component, because I can't stand using the new online app. Technology wise, it might have been better for them, but from a user perspective and how I use the app, oh, I can't stand it. It's silly things like I can't tell between my credit cards because they're both Chase cards, but I don't know which one's my Visa and which one's my MasterCard because the way it's displayed. If I want to log out, I have to log out, but also forget my device, right? There's a way to remember your device so you don't have to do the two-factor.
Right.
But the only way to remember the two-factor is for you not to officially log out. Well, who the heck doesn't log out of their online application? It's just ridiculous. It's stuff like that that just drives me crazy from a user experience, all in the name of digital transformation.
Yep. Yeah, and I when I read the headline, I really thought about it, and I was like, it really is more about a user experience and how people interact with technology more so than the technology itself. Because to be quite frank, I mean, a lot of the technology isn't really truly innovative, right? But the way that it's become more mainstream and the way humans interact with it is part of that evolution that we were dubbing digital transformation, right? But it's more about the human interaction with the technology.
Yeah, it's making our products and services more accessible to the users and the consumers of it in a very efficient way. And if user experience is not part of that design criteria, it doesn't matter what technology you're going to use, it's going to fail miserably.
Right.
And that's the point of this article. Government takes baby steps in data privacy with NIST framework and bill discussions. Obviously, GDPR kind of put privacy on the map, and there's been a lot of conversations about how this is going to roll out in the US. California passed a privacy regulation. We are starting to see some traction more centrally. I think the big fear with data privacy will be, do we have 50 different laws for 50 different states? Which means it's really going to be hard to implement for various companies. Or will the federal government come in and provide some direction? So NIST has been tagged with developing a privacy framework that looks like the first iteration is going to come out later this year around October. They've already done an initial request for information. They're soliciting feedback. I think there's a draft review in May with some sort of framework coming out in October, which would kind of look like the NIST cybersecurity framework, but from a privacy perspective, which is good. It would at least give us kind of an ideal framework of how to implement privacy in a consistent way. The next question then is, will Congress do something with that and pick up and kind of standardize it across the U.S. as one bill, or will we end up with 50 different legislations?
Right.
Looks like we're making a little progress on that front. So just something to track. I mean, obviously anybody in a senior role, these are going to be some interesting areas to watch over the next few months this year as they get into the draft and then maybe into this final framework.
It's always interesting how you have to deal with regulations and all that stuff on a national level, but also on a state-by-state basis.
Yeah.
Makes it very complicated.
It's very complicated. We went through this with the breach laws years ago. California did the first breach notification law, and then we ended up with 49 other variations across the country, which makes anybody who's in the breach notification business knows that depending on the breach and where your customers are and which state they're in, the requirements are different. That's super hard to manage. If we had one breach notification law, it would be easy. Everybody could comply because it would be one standard way to do it, but that doesn't exist. And people fear the same thing on the privacy side, is it will end up with 50 variations of implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gartner's top 10 security projects for 2019. So we'll spend a little bit of time on this one, Paul, because there's some interesting projects in here. Number one on the list is privileged access management. That's just a little interesting. We've been talking about privileged access for a while. I don't know the ranking order. I don't know if this is in priority order, but we're still seeing a lot on privileged access and the need to implement additional controls for accounts that have admin access. Number two on my list, or Gartner's list, is continuous adaptive risk and trust assessment inspired vulnerability management.
What is that?
So let me what does that mean? I think this is more of a risk-based prioritization of vulnerability management. Again,
something we've been wanting for a long time.
Long time. We talked about this in a session about a month ago. We talked about TVM, threat vulnerability management, and the need for a risk-based or prioritized approach to this, because having 10,000 open vulnerabilities by itself, we all know we can't close all those vulnerabilities. So which ones are the most important? That's what this means, is let's understand the risk associated with these vulnerabilities and then come up with a prioritized approach to actually solve and remediate these vulnerabilities.
Right.
Number three, detection and response, still high on the list. We've seen a lot in endpoint detection and response, updates to the Security Operations Center from a detection response perspective. That's number three on the list. A newer one, cloud security posture management. We had Cloud Needy on last week on Enterprise Security Weekly, kind of touching on this space, which is understanding the configuration, the security of your cloud environments. So this is number 4 on the list.
And they separate that from a CASB, a cloud access security broker, which is interesting.
Yeah, so CSPM is understanding the configuration of your cloud account and the configuration of the workloads that are in those cloud accounts. So think of that more as
like knowing what
infrastructure.
Knowing what you have, and then CASB is about who should have access to what.
Exactly. So the number 5 is CASB, which talks about access to those cloud environments, and then how do you secure that access and the interaction with those assets. So those are 4 and 5 together, which make a lot of sense.
For sure.
Number 6, business email compromise, still high on the list. We've been doing email forever. We talked about Armor. We talked to Armor Blocks a few weeks back, right before RSA, on business email compromise and some of the new techniques being used, leveraging natural language processing, for example, to do a better job of addressing this problem. Dark data discoveries, number 7. Which is interesting, right? I think it ties into GDPR and what data of yours is sitting out on the dark web, and how do you get it back or protect it or whatever. Security incident response is number 8, still high on the list. The SOC processes are not going away anytime soon, so secure incident response. Number 9 is container security, near and dear to my heart. I was surprised it was this kind of down here at 9. As we see more and more application development, I see this as a big challenge for organizations, understanding how to secure these new containerized environments, the new app, the APIs. This is a big space. I expect this to continue to go up the list over time. And then number 10 was security rating services. This is the external digital risk assessments with people like BitSight and Risk Recon, Security Scorecard, understanding, where all these, based on your relationship with companies, how are their external assets, how well do they score and rate? This drives into some third-party vendor management potential concerns and issues. So that's number 10. So that's Gartner's top 10 for this year.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of interesting projects there.
I think it needed our commentary, Matt. If I were to just read this, right, I might be like, what do you think they mean by that, right? I think it was a good discussion to kind of dig into how you think of each of these areas, right? And what we think Gartner really means by it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because, 2 paragraphs on some of these, not enough to really
enough.
understand the context.
Agreed.
And then my last article for this week is with Cloud Basics covered, organizations embrace the disruption of open source. Again, we talked a little bit about open source on the last segment. And I think this is an emerging area of concern in the application security space. We see a big move to open source under the DevOps movement. And open source is one area where I think there's still a lot of concerns and issues. And how do you manage and embrace it? We saw, for example, at Layered Insight, just the PHP library just continue to grow and grow and grow in vulnerabilities. Really nobody closing them, nobody solving them. And we're embedding these libraries and binaries into our main applications, which are going to create new attack vectors under these new apps. So I think this whole issue of open source is a big area that I think a lot of people need to get their arms around and kind of figure out how best do I manage inventory of my open source, analyzing that open source for vulnerabilities. How do I patch it? How do those new versions impact my application going forward? These are all big areas, I think, of concern.
Agreed. Sorry, I was just sipping my coffee.
Oh,
Slowly.
It was either that or you're smoking your cigar.
That too, while you were talking. I think it's interesting how they drew the correlation between cloud and open source, which is interesting. I think open source is in a different light in the enterprise today, as is evidenced by whole new categories being created in these areas. But I think you're right, or in the article's correct in that as you're pushing applications to the cloud, your applications are more nimble. It's really just the application, and you're likely using some type of open source component in the development, in the CI/CD pipeline, in your deployment strategy, right? And so that becomes more and more of an issue today.
Yeah, you're also seeing very large vendors really embracing open source. Microsoft has been a big component of embracing more open source and building trust with the open source community. You saw the acquisition of Red Hat by IBM, bringing open source components into the IBM portfolio. So, I mean, you're seeing some major companies also see the same trend and embracing open source differently than they ever have. Because, well, let's go back 10 years. Microsoft, open source, IBM, open source. Those conversations weren't happening back then, but it's this move to the open source as part of some of this transformation that we're going through. Now you're seeing big corporate vendors now supporting and embracing open source like Microsoft and IBM, and I think that's also just going to help continue to fuel more adoption of this open source technology. But there, again, I think there's some gaps in the way we secure it and manage it that still have to be addressed.
Right. Agreed.
All right. Cool. That's all I had for this week, Paul.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.